Hi, and welcome to chapter 7. So we are going to move into chapter 7, and let me see if I can share my screen here. Give me one moment, and we will move into chapter 7. Now, let's see. There you go. And let's start the slideshow for us. So, chapter 7. So, we're talking to you about negotiation communication. And this is coming to you from chapter 7, negotiations sub processes. Again, we're coming to you from a text from McGraw Hill Education, and it's a title Negotiation by Roy Lewicki, Bruce Berry, and David Saunders. And so, let's move on. So, there are basic models of communication. Communication is an activity occurring between two people, a sender and a receiver, right? The receivers have a thought or meaning in mind, or the senders rather. The senders have a thought or a meaning in mind, and the senders encode the meaning into a message to transmit it to the receiver. The message is transmitted through a channel or medium to the receiver. The receiver decodes or interprets it, gaining understanding or not. Sometimes they don't gain understanding. In one-way communication, this process could be complete. A two-way process cycles back and forth, and then a transactional model captures the bidirectional nature of the two-way communication. And so on the monitor now is a figure that shows this process. So the two-party exchange and feedback is the receiver takes an active role in several ways. The recipient receives and interprets the message both for content and the other party's motives for transmitting it. And the recipient then becomes a sender, encoding a response. So effective communicators pause to consider the best channel to use. In negotiation, the feedback can take various forms: a nonverbal gesture, an expressed emotion, a question asking for clarification, a response, explanation, or rebuttal to the first message. And so this is typically how messages go. Now, many times we've seen that there have been challenges when people text messages, since that is a way we send and receive or communicate a lot through text messaging. Sometimes when we send those text messages, there could be reason or cause for people not to receive the information as the sender intended for it to be. So there could be distortions in the communication. So under individual communicators, each have goals. Diverse goals or antagonism may lead to distortion or errors. Messages are the symbolic forms used to communicate. Symbolic prone communication can distort meaning and intent. And then there's encoding, is putting the message into symbolic form affected by skills. So when the encoding happens, it's affected by skills. So not only do you have to me, consider the skills of the sender, you got to consider the skills of the receiver. So there are channels or media or transmitting messages. Verbal, nonverbal, symbolic, sent by which conduit. Reception is the process of the comprehension. Language differences lead to distortion and errors, or cultural differences or generational differences can even lead to distortions in the way things come across to the next person. Interpretation is gaining the meaning of the decoded message, and then everyone filters the messages. So how do you avoid this distortion in feedback? So an important way to avoid problems in communication giving the other party feedback. Inform the sender the message was received, encode and extract with the meaning the sender intended, or re-ask the question. Absence of feedback contributes to distortions. So if people don't give you feedback, you know that there's some distortion more than likely somewhere. So in negotiation, feedback can distort communication by influencing their offers or evaluations of possible outcomes. So negotiators should remember that feedback can be used strategically to either introduce concessions, change strategies, or assessment. So now, what is communicated during a negotiation? Offers, counter offers, and motives. So communication of offers is dynamic, interactive, and drives change. Information about alternatives, the existence of BANTA, changes several things in a negotiation. So information about outcomes now, we have to be cautious about sharing outcomes or even possible reactions to the negotiation or the communication around the negotiations. Social accounts or explanations to the other party. That means explaining, mitigating, or different circumstances or reframing them. Communication about processes. This may not be just helpful, but crucial when conflicts intensifies. So what is communicated? There are three key questions to ask. Are negotiators consistent or adaptive? Negotiations or negotiators are more likely to be consistent in their communication patterns than to vary their approach. Now, does it matter what is said early in the negotiation? So high status negotiators did better when they had more speaking time during the first 5 minutes, but tone matters. So only mixed evidence for a link of early communication to joint gains. Is more information always better? Not necessarily. Too much information may lead to the information is weakness effect. This may depend on the type of issues and types of information used. So how people communicate? The language. In negotiation, language operates at two levels. The logical level for proposals or offers, and then the pragmatic level, systematic, syntax, and style. Communication depends on encoding and decoding. Idioms, or colloquialisms may be a problem. Also, miscommunications between males and females or between cultures. And this happens big, that whole dynamic between how male looks at things and how female looks at things, how different cultures look at things, and words we use and the way we state things, even in a sentence. So choice of words signal a position, but also shape and predict the conversation that ensures. Linguistic patterns early in the negotiation help define issues in ways that may help integrative possibilities later on in the conversations. So you may say, Dr. Carroll, what is you talking? Use the nonverbal communication. Use of a nonverbal communication is also important, guys. So some nonverbal acts, attending behaviors are important. Making eye contact is extremely important. So men were taught not to, as we stated on the call the other night, I think it was Michael on our call, talked about there is a way that this is a cue that you are listening, but occasionally look away. Use this when speaking, keeping verbal, non-verbal clues in sync. Adjust body position. Yes. Hold your body erect, lean forward, and face the person directly. This is a good way of communicating with people. Non-verbally encourage or discourage what others say. So a few simple gestures could encourage or discourage a speaker. Non-verbal communication done well may achieve better outcomes, and non-verbal communication can also be used in teleconferencing. Yes. So selection of communication channels. Communication is experienced differently through different channels. Face-to-face, telephone, or writing are traditional. The use of network-mediated information is called verbal negotiation. The choice of channels shapes perceptions and behavior norms. The key variation between channels is social bandwidth. The ability to carry and convey subtle cues beyond the literal message. So that's, what's happening here. Email is a written communication now with some distinction. People treat emails as informal and send unpolished messages. I have done that before, and it's been a disaster for me because you get in the process of doing it so much that you forget that this is a formal process and you have to make sure it's polished and it presents the right message. The lack of social cues lowers inhibition and may lead to flaming. So communication channels and outcomes. Rapport is more likely in face-to-face channels, really. It really is. You can build better rapport, that dialogue. It's something about people being in your space at that moment that helps you to react to things a little differently. Also, disclosure of truthful information is more likely. Written channels are more likely to end in impasse. Face-to-face promotes cooperation, but may also enhance toughness. Email can mask or reduce power differences. And so reviewability is an asset, but there are a couple of drawbacks. E-negotiation gives an excuse from preparing properly. Written or writing and e-negotiations is challenging and it really leads to a rapid closure. Email negotiation and media management. Let's talk about that for a few minutes. In e-negotiation, impasse is likely as party numbers increase. Smoothing on the telephone prior to negotiation improves outcomes. It just does. Medium management is using virtual channels effectively. Reactive medium managers are less successful than proactive. So email is a slow tempo medium and texting is a fast tempo medium. Naturally, we're only texting so many words and we're getting through. We're not doing a book. Sometimes some of us do, but texting typically is fast mode. Let's get it done. Let's say what we have to say and move on. So complex arguments benefit from quick mediums, not in the slow mediums. And the communication orientation model suggests using different channels depending on cooperation and mindset. So bias with online negotiations. Temporal synchrony bias tendency is to believe as if in a synchronous situation when it is not, meaning same. Burned bridge bias, tendency to employ risky behavior not used in face-to-face encounters. And squeaky wheel bias, the squeaky wheel gets the turn. Tendency to use negative emotional style to achieve goals, and then sinister attribution bias occurs when behavior is attributed to personality flaws. Creating a positive rapport can help combat biases. So you can improve negotiation communication by asking the following questions. Questions clarify communication, eliminating noise and distortion. Good questions can secure information. So questions can be sidestepped or answered untruthfully. The other party may be unaware of their own bias and emotions. There are two categories of questions. They're manageable and unmanageable. Manageable calls attention, get information, and generate thoughts. Unmanageable cause difficulty, give information, and bring discussion to a false conclusion. So using questions to manage difficult or stall negotiations, use why not rather than why questions. And improve negotiation communication by listening, guys. Passive listening is where you receive the message, but provide no feedback. Acknowledgement. You have to acknowledge the message with a nod, eye contact, or interjection. Active listening involves you restate or paraphrase the sender's message in your own words. And then you eliminate in reflective responding a critical part of active listening. An emphasis on listening and responding to personal points, following rather than leading and responding to the other's feelings is an important part of active listening. Active listening is a skill, guys. Yes, I know some people didn't realize that, but active listening is really a skill set. It takes pulling together a lot of you to really take away anything you have on your mind at that time and really listen to what the person is talking about at that particular moment in time. So, how do you improve negotiation? Communication through one way is through role reversal. Arguing consistently from one position can impede recognition of possible compatibility between the positions. And then active listening is a passive process, but role reversal allows a more complete understanding of the other's positions. There are two implications for non negotiators. The party attempting the role reversal may lead to lead to converge positions between the two parties. And then there is more likely, this is more likely when positions are compatible, but may sharpen perception when positions are incompatible. So improve negotiation communication through role reversal continues. So I'm sorry, and that ends the chapter. I guess I was into that a little bit more, but that should help us to understand chapter 7 and communications and what we can do. Remember, being an active listener really takes a skill set that is required for us to be an active listener in the process. And so let's all practice active listening skill sets. That's it for chapter 7. I will see you next week for chapter 8.